Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I get up here today and just the privilege and the honor to be a member of Parliament for the riding of Prince Albert today is one that, you know, when you come into Parliament as a member of Parliament, you look at the things that you'd like to accomplish as a member of Parliament, and you look at the things that your constituents want you to accomplish, and this is one that is one in both. It's one thing I like to see happen, and it's one thing that my constituents want to happen, and that's the change of the Canadian Wheat Board. You know, we've heard a lot of talk today about the Canadian Wheat Board and what's going on, and of course the Liberal members would have you believe that the Canadian Wheat Board is actually being totally disbanded and everybody's thrown out of work and it won't exist, and that's further from the truth. What's actually happening, Mr. Speaker, is the Wheat Board's being transitioned. It's being transitioned to a functioning entity that farmers want, that farmers who want to participate in it will be able to, will have the option to participate in it, and the farmers who don't want to will have that option also.
That's fair.
That is the same right and privilege that farmers right across Canada have. And that'll be the same rights and privileges that farmers in the designated area will also have. You know, Mr. Speaker, this has been a very divisive debate for the last 40 years. There hasn't been any new arguments brought to the table in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks or last 6 months or last year that would change a member's mind or change a constituent's or a farmer's mind on where he sits in this debate. You know, everybody has their ideology when it comes looking forward to this debate. Everybody has the reasons for believing what they believe. It's really interesting when you look back at the history of this file, you'll see a report from the Canadian Wheat Board, paid for by the Canadian Wheat Board, saying it extracts a premium. Then you also go back and you see a report by George Moore Center saying there is no premium. Those types of arguments have been going on and on and on and on the prairies for probably the last 40 years. But you know, one argument you can't fight against, and that's freedom. You can't fight against the right of your property. You cannot tell people that I am going to take what's yours and now make it ours. That's improper. That's not right. You can argue all sorts of reasons on why you want collective marketing. You can argue for all reasons why you want to see the CWB or why you want to proceed in, and those options would be there. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? It's their work. It's their hard work that creates that crop. It's their hard work that's actually going to grow that wheat and barley, and it's their hard work that they should be able to receive the rewards from all that hard work. I don't want to forget, Mr. Speaker, I will be sharing my time with the member from Portage Lisgar, so I just want to make sure you're aware of that. You know, it's interesting the path moving forward when we look at the CWB. This last summer, they knew exactly what was going on. They knew the transition was going to happen. They had all the tools in front of them to go forward, and they decided not to. This board, instead of working with farmers, instead of working with the government, instead of working with the accredited exporters, instead of working with their customers, decided to do the opposite. They decided to become a bunch of political agents and work for the NDP and the Liberal Party. They decided to do that with farmers' money. Sure. They took farmers' money without asking them and basically started a campaign, not so much for what they believe in, it's just their ideology that they believe in, but they didn't represent farmers. You know, they could have went out this summer, and they could have actually went and sold wheat and barley over the next 4 or 5 years. They went and did a plebiscite. They identified voters. They identified people that were going to support the CWB. Why didn't they go and ask them to sign up acres? Why didn't they go to them and say, you know what, you support the single desk, or you support the Canadian Wheat Board, the concept of pooling your product together, so we can still do that. We can actually move forward on this file. We'll take your acres and we'll market them on your behalf. We'll offer a pooled price. They could have set up a program to do that. But no, they didn't do that. And it's interesting, you know, when I talk to different accredited exporters who've been through the House of Commons, there's concern on their side too. They're looking for an entity to work with to actually source grain on the prairies. Again, they're familiar with the Canadian Wheat Board. They're familiar with the staff that's there. The directors just needed to give the staff the green light to go ahead. But did they do that? No. They engaged in a political debate. They engaged in their own self-preference, their own ideology. And actually, that's why they needed to be removed, and that's why a transition board needed to come forward, so that actually it protected not only the employees of the Canadian Wheat Board that are good, hard-working people, but actually protected the farmers who wanted to use the chance of pooling, who wanted to use this entity to market their wheat and barley. And, you know, it's going to be really interesting as we look forward with this entity, the new CWB, on what it can become. There's no shackles on it. It can actually do what it wants to do. The farmers who support it can actually lead that organization to where they want it to go. So if they want to handle pulses, if they can find a market where they can sell pulses into and tie it in with some wheat and barley, they can do that.
Makes sense.
If they want to handle canola, they can do that. You know what? If they want to handle oats or wheat and barley out of Ontario or Quebec, they can do that.
Why not?
They have the ability to take the organization where they feel it needs to go. And that's something that farmers have never had with the Canadian Wheat Board. That's something that's never been represented in the way the CWB operates and runs. You know, it's been so many times in the prairies where we've seen value-added entities come up, and I use the example of the Weyburn pasta plant with the Weyburn Inland Terminals, and it's such a good example. Here's a group of farmers that wanted to build a pasta plant. They got together, they raised the funds, they found the market for the pasta, they had everything to rock and roll. They're ready to go. And it was the CWB that stepped in and said no. You know, the CWB isn't there for themselves, they're there for farmers. That's their main goal. They're a tool to be used by farmers. But in this situation, they refuse to adapt their tool to allow farmers to use it properly. So instead of farmers being able to appreciate and actually work with the board and actually figure out a way around it so that this pasta plant can go forward, what did they do? The CWB said no. And that's been a problem with the CWB as the history as we look in the past of how they operated. They were never there to work necessarily for farmers. They were there to protect their ideology, their single desk. They never worked with guys that wanted to proceed with niche markets and other opportunities. They would say, yes, we can do the buyback option, we can look at other options for you to buy back the product and proceed that, but they always made it a hurdle or impossible to do that. And the other thing that was always interesting with the buybacks, and I had a few farmers talk to me about this, is they went through the process. They found their own market, they did the buyback. On the buyback form, they'd actually have to put on there who they're selling their wheat to. So they'd put in good faith the name of the company that they're selling their wheat to across the line or overseas. And the next week, they'd get a phone call from their customer, and here the CWB has gone in there and undercut them. You know, so you wonder, okay, how hard was this organization actually out there actively searching for markets for farmers' grains? Or were they just a little comfortable in how they went about doing it? You know, that's the thing that about the changes we see in this legislation that I think is going to be really positive for the prairies and for farmers as a whole, is you're going to have all this variety of marketing of product. You know, one thing we've heard a lot of people complain about is the level of service out of railways. Well, if you want competition for the railways, the best competition is value added. The best competition is not to use the railway, to actually process that grain right there and then, and actually create a product that doesn't necessarily have to go in a hopper car. That's the best way to get competition for the railways, and that will happen now on the prairies. That is something that was not allowed to happen and could not happen on the prairies in the past. And you know, you can look at the cross line at the malt plant, you can look at Alberta, the malt plant that's going through the expansion there. You know, I look forward for all those types of opportunities to come forward to our producers. You know, I also look forward to the barley grower who wants to just ship 4 or 5 containers of barley over to Indonesia. You know, in today's day and age, it's not a big deal. It's not the 40s or the 30s where you had telecommunication issues, you had issues with travel. People hop on planes daily now. People talk across the waters all the time. The grain markets out of Chicago, people watch them daily. You know, it's not a big issue like it was in the past. So, Mr. Speaker, I guess I'm quietly just summing up some of the things that I've seen happening around here. But, you know, I'm optimistic. I'm very, very optimistic on what the future for wheat and barley farmers are. I'm very optimistic for farmers in general on the future that they have. More optimistic now than I would say I've ever been in my farming career or my political career. But, you know, we wouldn't have got here with a lot of help, or without the help of a lot of great individuals. There's a lot of guys who fought in the trenches on this file. There's a lot of farmers who actually put their own blood, sweat, and tears into this file. There's farmers that went to jail just basically wanting to have the right to sell their own product. And you know what? My hat goes off to those farmers, and I'd say thank you to them. You know, you kept the torch alive, and you didn't do it for yourself. You did it for your kids. You did it for the industry of whole. You actually had the ambition and the drive to say, you know what, we can do better than this. And again, I take my hats off to you guys, and I just want to thank you for being there, for doing that type of job. You know, the guys that went to jail, you know, talk about the ultimate sacrifice, giving up your time with your wife and families, going through the court systems. You know, I remember driving down to Lethbridge to watch one of the court proceedings and talking to a few of those guys, and my buddy Rick Strankman took me down there and says, Hoback, you got to see these guys. He said, they're pure and pure through. They weren't doing it because they're greedy. They weren't doing it for any other reasons other than they thought that was the best thing for the market. That was the best thing for farmers. That was the best thing for their family, and they should have the right to market their grain as they see fit. And you know what? That's what we're going to do here today. We're going to create a new entity. And how this entity moves forward, farmers will decide. It'll go through a transition board, and then through that transition period, it will go through rediscovering itself. But you know, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, the whole farm sector is going to be stronger for it. At the end of the day, a lot of constituents will say, this debate on single desk or not will finally be over. So again, I'd like to thank the Minister, I'd like to thank my colleagues, and I would like to encourage the members of the opposition to work with us as we move forward in agriculture in Western Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for BC Southern Interior.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just picking up on my honourable colleague's mention of blood, sweat and tears, I think we should all realize that a lot of blood, sweat and tears have gone to build up this organization that has gained a worldwide reputation, and now we're wiping the rug right out from underneath it. I appreciate the work that my colleague has done on the committee, and I enjoy working with him, but I just want to defend those farm elected directors that he's attacking today. I don't think that's right. These people have been elected by farmers. They represent the majority of farmers, and now they're being replaced by 5 government robots or stooges, and I don't think that that's right. But my question to him is that, we talk about moving wheat across the border. A lot of us have been involved with the American regulations, the country of origin labeling. We've seen how the border has been shut down to our meat, our pork and our beef, and now we're thinking that somehow farmers are saying we can be moving our wheat right across our border. But in this climate of protectionism, this Buy America, America First, does he believe that it's possible that the border will be shut down to our wheat if we get enough wheat going across the border? In other words, are the Americans going to stand for having all of our good quality wheat coming in to be mixed up with theirs? I'd like him to answer that question.
The Honourable Member for Prince Albert.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the colleague for the question, and I too enjoy working with him on the Ag Committee, and I appreciate his passion for agriculture, even though we disagree on maybe how agriculture should move forward in the future. He asked a question that's speculative in nature. When we look at trade, that's one thing that we've done as a government is we've gone abroad and we've worked on trade agreements and creating proper rules so that science-based trade can actually proceed without interference. And that's things that we've been working on with our American partners through the NAFTA, the Free Trade Agreement, and that's things we've been working with across the world. But the misconception he's spreading here is a combination of things. All of a sudden everybody thinks August 1st, 2012, all these trucks are going to be lined up at the border and heading south. Well, the reality is the basis will actually change, and it'll reflect off a futures price that'll either be out of Winnipeg or Minneapolis and then reflected back to the town of Prince Albert, and then that'll actually be the price they get at the truck. So again, to say that we're going to ship all this grain into the U.S., I actually don't think it's going to happen. What's really going to happen is farmers are going to look for value-added opportunities. Farmers are going to look for other markets. Farmers are going to use the new entity to sell into other markets. Exactly. It's just they're going to have choice in how they go about doing it.
Great idea.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Melpack.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the member for his speech, and I've worked for him with him on committee as well, and I know I think we work reasonably well together. We may disagree strenuously on this particular issue, but I do take issue with the fact that he basically said that the members of the elected Canadian Wheat Board were not there to work for farmers, and I think he's absolutely wrong on that. They were elected. The board changed in the beginning of 1998. They come in with somewhere around 10 options for farmers that they never had before, and there's actually more options under the Canadian Wheat Board than there will be under the open market. But my question, and they stood in election. They won their elections. 8 out of 10 of them, as pro-single desk selling, won their elections, and the government is taking their voice, farmers' voice, and vote away by this legislation, just rolling over it, getting rid of the legislation, firing the board, and coming into the government-appointed board. My question, Mr. Speaker, is, why didn't the government do the proper study and take the time to do it right? You have a majority. The government has a majority, Mr. Speaker. They could have held hearings in the West to hear from farmers. They could have seen the trouble spots. What about the transportation and collection system? What about producer cars? And what about short line rails? How is the government going to ensure that they stay and are protected for farmers' interests?
The Honourable Member for Prince Albert.
Again, I thank the member for his questions. He talks about short line rails. Well, short line rails and actually producer cars, I think, is more what he's referring to, or actually is under the Canada Grain Act. It's not even has anything to do with the Canadian Wheat Board Act. So that right is being preserved, and we know that will be used as they move forward. But when it comes to producer cars, or actually, I guess we might as well go to the directors' elections. That's one thing that I always found very frustrating. In this plebiscite they so-called had, they had sent out, I think it was 68,000 ballots. So what, 22,000 producers that actually produce wheat? Where did the extra ballots go? That's always been a frustration with the type of election they ran. No one knew who got to vote for who. No one knew exactly how these ballots were being consumed. The other thing that was never reflected in the ballots is you had a combination of producers who would farm 1,000 or 2,000 acres, maybe 10,000 acres, grow thousands and thousands of tons. That person would have one vote, and the guy that actually only had 100 acres and didn't produce maybe only 2 or 3 tons or a very small quantity had the exact same number of votes. Again, the Wheat Board isn't a political organization. It's not a governing body. It's a business. So if you wanted to have a proper vote, then we should have actually had a vote based on tonnage or acres that actually would have reflected what farmers who are in the commercial business of farming would have had a chance to vote. But there's no way that that member would ever set up a system like that. There's no way that the Liberals would ever set up a system like that because they know the results would be exactly what's going to happen here today. So as far as this debate, it's been going on and on and on. Farmers are tired of it. They want to see us move forward. They don't want to see us catch up or have to spend a lot of time educating our opposition members on why this needs to change. They just want to see it done, and that's what we're going to do.